Emmeline Pankhurst, the woman who wants women to be able to vote. I campaigned all my life to equal rights for women. I started a political group which fought for the vote for women in Britain. After many years of protest, we finally won the right for British women to vote. When I was born in 1858, women in Britain didn't have the same rights as men. Most women couldn't go to school nor university. They were only allowed to work in certain jobs, and they didn't have the right to vote. I grew up in Manchester in the north of England, and I saw many problems every day. Mothers had to bring up children in small, dirty houses. Disease was everywhere because of the terrible conditions. And most women only lived until they were around 50 years old. I knew from a young age that I want to improve women's life. My parents believed in human rights. They believed that education was a right for women as well as men. In 1873, my parents sent me to the school in Paris. They wanted me to get a wider view of the world. In Paris, I was disappointed to discover that women were still not equal with men after the French Revolution. Actions was needed, and I returned to England to begin the fight. In Britain, the political situation was quite unusual. Our ruler was a woman, Queen Victoria. She was a powerful leader, but she wasn't interested in women's rights. Our politicians were all men, and they definitely weren't interested in political equality for women. In 1879, I was surprised to discover a man who was campaigning for women's rights. His name was Richard Pankhurst, and he was a lawyer. We shared many of the same beliefs and ideas. We got married and started a family. For almost 20 years, Richard and I fought for political rights for women. Then, sadly, my dear husband died. My daughters and I were very sad, but we decided to continue our campaign. The two oldest daughters, Christabel and Sylvia, became activists. In 1903, we started the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU. It was a group that fought for the right for women to vote. Christabel became one of our bravest leaders. Sylvia was an artist and she designed our posters and signs. The WSPU organized many public meetings and protests. Sometimes the police arrested our members. Christabel was one of the first to go to prison. When our members were in prison, we protested. And when our members came out of prison, we celebrated in the streets. It was very important to get public attention. Unfortunately, the government didn't agree with our campaign. We had to take more powerful action. Some of our members began to break the law. They lit fires in buildings and broke windows. Our campaign was a war for these women. For me, it was always a war for equal rights. Every time I was arrested, I told the judge, "We don't want to break laws, we want to make new laws." But the lawyers and politicians didn't want to listen. In 1910, Prime Minister Asquith, the government leader, stopped a new law that gave women to vote. We were shocked and angry. On Friday, 18th November, I led a group of women to meet the Prime Minister, but he refused to see us. We started to protest in the street and 100 women were arrested. It was a terrible day. We called it Black Friday. In 1914, the First World War began and we agreed to stop our campaign. Women were now needed as nurses in hospitals and to work in factories and on farms. In 1917, we started a new group with a new name, the Women's Party. In 1918, the First World War ended. The government realized that women were an important part of the victory in the war. At last, women were given the right to vote. but only women over 30 years old who are at home could vote, and men over 21 could vote. We still didn't have full equality. After the war, I went to live in the USA, Canada, and also Bermuda. In 1926, I returned to England. I wanted to become a politician, but my health wasn't good enough. In 1928, only 3 weeks before I died, a new law gave women the same right to vote as men. It took much longer than we hoped. But in the end, our campaign was successful, and at last we won political equality for women. The life of Emmeline Pankhurst. 1858, Emmeline Gordon was born in Manchester, England. 1816, she became interested in women's rights as a child and went to political meetings. 1873, she was sent to a school in Paris, which believed in equal education for boys and girls. 1879, she met and married Richard Pankhurst, a lawyer. He believed in vote for women. 1886, the family moved to London. They had meetings for political activities in their home. 1893, Richard and Emmeline returned to Manchester. 1898, Richard died, but Emmeline decided to continue the campaign to win the vote for women. 1903, Emmeline and her daughters, Christabel and Sylvia, started the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU, which fought for political equality for women. 1905, Christabel was arrested during a protest. 1908, Emmeline was arrested for the first time. She went to prison for 6 weeks. 1910, Prime Minister Asquith stopped a law that gave women to vote. The WSPU protested and 100 women were arrested. 1914, the First World War started. The WSPU stopped their campaign for the vote. 1916, Emmeline visited the USA, Canada, and Russia. She wanted women there to fight for the vote in their countries. 1917, Christabel and Emmeline started the Women's Party. 1918, the First World War ended. Women over 30 years old won the right to vote. After the war, Emmeline went to live in the USA, Canada, and Bermuda. 1926, she returned to England and wanted to become a politician. She became ill and couldn't continue with her plans. 1928, Emmeline died in London a few weeks after a new law gave equal voting rights for women. She was 69 years old. Thanks for your listening.